Hey guys, I wanted to talk quickly about why we're seeing such a strange bot meta develop. Recently, Keria on T1 has picked Caitlyn support and then Kalista support as well. There's been a ton of Heimer flowing around and just Ashe support across every region. And there are many reasons that we are seeing this, but I think where we should start is with runes and items. So what you will notice is for most of these picks, they run Hail of Blades. Hail of Blades is extremely oppressive, fantastic in the early game. You can just force Prio in the bot lane, take heavy trades, and snowball 2v2. So Hail of Blades, but not only Hail of Blades, but Zombie Ward and Umbral Glaive. So what you'll also notice with these ADCs that do end up going support is they have Hail of Blades, they have Zombie Ward, they have Umbral Glaive. Umbral is incredibly oppressive, especially in pro play when games are typically a little bit more structured with more wars on vision. And so one-shotting those wards and then having those zombie wards pop up, zombie ward is also very, very broken. The synergy is just overwhelming. So expanding a little bit more on why Hail of Blades leads to Prio on these ADCs. So having those 3 auto attacks early on, incredibly oppressive, where the more base damage you can have in the early game, in those early levels, the more impact you're going to have. And so having 3 quick auto attacks, it's not going to scale at all, but in a short, concise trade, and at the start of the game when base damages are more valuable, you can think of Comet, you can think of Electrocute, Hail of Blades, resetting your auto attacks to do a lot of initial base damage as well is going to be quite oppressive. Now also the ADCs have, AD. They have more AD than typical mage bullies. And with more AD, they're going to win extended trades. They're going to shove more naturally, so they can constantly be auto-attacking minions, and those auto-attacks are going to be doing more to the minion waves than, let's say, a Karma or a Heimer. And so you can win short trades. Your trades aren't gated by mana or by cooldowns necessarily. You shove faster, and you typically have more range with your auto-attacks. But of course, this is not enough to justify those picks. So why is it so important to get shove, to get Prio in the bot lane? Now, this has actually been a long time coming. I predicted towards the end of last year before Worlds that Varus was going to skyrocket in the picks. No one was really picking him. He was great at getting Prio. He can fit into a lot of comps. He was well adapted to the meta in terms of top side can play strong, then he can get early Prio and just let other members of his team be the carry. Jhin and Ashe fit similar archetypes here, where they have a lot of early shove, lane pressure, and then they have utility and setup, and are great in comps and in metas when top sides are going to be the win conditions. So in my opinion right now, top side isn't the win condition, but literally just objectives, just neutrals. Tower plates, golds, dragons, and heralds, they are the win condition. And so playing these hard shoving Prio lanes is going to allow you a win condition away from just the typical scaling AD, get a bunch of items and team fight. And so then he picked up a lot of popularity, and towards the end of Worlds, he was actually first pick or ban quite a lot of the time. And then Heimerdinger popped up, and he had such success for a couple reasons. The first is because his turrets are just way too tanky, so it's hard to kill the turrets, and then he can just force early Prio. And now what everyone has been starting to realize is that early Prio is just so oppressive. And the reason is there is just so many objectives, so much incentive to have a strong early game. You have plates that you can play for. They got recently buffed as well, just by a little bit of gold, but that's still relevant. You can stack dragons, and Dragon Soul is always a fantastic win con. Unless it's Cloud Soul, then it's a little bit touch and go, but for the most part, great objective to play for. And with the introduction of Chemtech Soul, then that is just a little bit less likely for you to get that Cloud Soul. But the main point in my eyes is Herald. And Riot recently introduced a huge kill gold onto Herald. I think they included about 300 gold additionally, even before it starts to charge and get plates down and get that first tower. So what you can do is you can get bot Prio, you can get a couple plates, you can start stacking up the dragons, you can get Herald as well. And the reason that it is quite replicable to get Herald with these hard Prio bot lanes is because they can use their Prio, they can move to facilitate Herald. So 2 members showing up with Prio to this objective is going to secure it for the most part. And then once you have Herald, what you can typically do is just send your bot lane back to bot, and then let your jungler come down towards bot and then blow up the tower with Heralds, and just really start to accelerate your bot lane. Now, when we do see these bot lanes with AD carries as a support, you need to have a specific type of jungler to really make it work. You need to play around them. You need to give them safety and assurance to dominate in the 2v2. You need to stack up the neutrals. You need to have a lower efficiency than a typical full clearing jungler. And where this comes online is with the strength of Radiant Virtue. So if you picture current meta junglers running around now, you can picture Sejuani, Zac, Vi. They're all excellent users of Radiant Virtue, which is a very broken item for junglers at the moment. And they don't need to have a huge amount of efficiency. The win condition can be accelerated bot and just stacking neutrals. Further proof that this playing for bot lane Prio and accelerating bot lane early game is so important, at least in this meta, is the rapid rise in popularity of Elise. Now, Elise is probably the best champ in the entire game for tower dives. What you can do if you have intelligent jungle pathing is to coordinate a bot dive, get a kill or two, accelerate your bot lane, and then we talked about what an accelerated bot lane can do for your team. Now, I want to briefly talk about Ashe because she has so much utility outside of just having Halo Blades, heavily trading, and winning bot lane Prio. Her E, one of the most broken spells, probably the most broken basic spell in the game, I would say. If you know when and how to use her E intelligently, it can just be an absolute game changer. And then, of course, her ultimate with Ulti Hunter as well, incredibly low cooldown, you can create picks from safety. Jhin had some utility as well, right? He was picked as a Heimer counter. Now, I'm not necessarily convinced that he does counter Heimer. I think he can be picked in a lot of different situations as well, right? He can just throw out his Q onto the wave, get early Prio, and then have that utility with Zombie, with Umbral Glaive, with his W, his E, his R. So he's been underplayed a little bit, in my opinion. But what happens if we index a little more into early domination and a little less into utility? Well, then the logical conclusion of playing for as much strength as possible in the bottom lane, that's where we start to see carrier picks pop up. We have the Caitlyn, longest auto attack range in the game. We see Kalista notoriously strong in early trades, especially paired with Halo Blades. And just as a further optimization, we can see people taking really aggressive trades. As a support, you can run barrier or you can run heal with Halo Blades and just take a psychotic 1v2 trade on the first wave, and then your cooldown is going to be back up relatively quickly. And so this is just going to be something for supports and for, pro teams to think about. How much do we want to index into pure lane domination? How much can we kind of double dip, have lane domination, and have some utility like the Ashe and the Jhin? I'm waiting for teams to actually pick up Quinn support because she can run the red tree, she can run Umbral, she can roam. She has all of her spells, Q, W, E, R. They all have some form of utility as well. And it's incredibly easy to proc Electrocute, which has an insane amount of damage in the early game. Now, I want to talk about the differences between pro play and solo queue. Why is it happening in pro play? Should it happen in solo queue or not? The reason that it is very doable in pro play at the moment is because of how they draft. You can flex pick these ADCs, right? You can flex Ashe to ADC or support. And the thing that all of these ADCs as support have in common is that they are extremely susceptible to all-in lane. A team could easily pick Nautilus or Pyke or maybe even Leona into one of these, ADC supports, into a double ADC lane, and then find a lot of success. However, pros are very stubborn at the moment in terms of blinding their support and their bot lane already. That's why we see so much, scaling ADC with the Lulu or, Lucian and Nami or someone in Yumi as well. They feel like that is blindable, and then the natural counter to that is just dominating lane as hard as possible with these ADCs as support. And so you will very rarely see any of these weird ADCs as a support as a blind pick. Either an Ashe will be picked and that can be flexed to ADC so that Ashe support isn't blind picked, or one of the enchanters will be blind picked, or Heimer will be blind picked, which is not counted by hard engage either. So in pro drafts, they are always given the luxury of being able to pick these lane dominant supports in a safe manner. And so there are very little engages running around, very little threat that these lanes have to worry about. Now, of course, pro games are much more coordinated than solo queue as well. And so typically in solo queue, your jungler is just going to do what they want. They're also going to pick what they want. It's very unlikely that your jungler is going to pick a Sejuani or a Zac or a Vi or any of these champions that can abuse Radiant Virtue and can have a little bit lower economy to facilitate what this bot lane can bring. It's also very unlikely that they will stack dragons, 2 dragons before the plates fall. It's very unlikely that your team will coordinate to get that first herald. And then if you're just left to your own devices and there are a bunch of assassins running around and you're not able to do what you need to do in the early game, it can look really, really rough. Now, as a caveat to that, it's very likely that players in solo queue won't really understand the strength of the champs that you're picking. So let's say you pick a Caitlyn support and then they take an early trade and they're not really sure why it's going wrong, and then they start to get tilted because they're falling behind, but it's natural for them to fall behind, and then Caitlyn support's going to become useless, but they haven't really thought it out, they haven't really had practice against it, And so that could be an argument to do these strategies in solo queue. However, I think the likelihood of success for bot lanes like this is much higher in pro play, and potentially high elo. And when I say high elo, Masters Plus. If you are intrigued by this new strategy and this playstyle, I have a couple champ recommendations for you to give a go. I did already mention Quinn, great user of Electrocute, even Cheap Shot as well. You would build Umbral and then Prowler's Claw, because your Prowlers can cancel your E and you can end up on top of them just absolutely one shot. Great mobility. Kit is great for solo queue and has a lot of utility as well. And then Akshan. Now Akshan would take PTA because he can proc that so easily, but he's just one of the strongest level 1, level 2 champs in the game. His passive and his Q are just incredibly stacked. He can clean up a lot of messy fights which you would expect to find in solo queue, and then being constantly invisible can be very tricky to keep track of him. Otherwise, Ashe is always going to be a really solid and safe bet. Abuse the early power with Halo Blades, and have E and R to always be useful throughout the game. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. Big thank you to all of my Patreons over here. I really couldn't do this without you. The links for coaching, for Patreon, for my School of Support Discord server, for socials, they're all going to be linked in the description below. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. I am streaming 5 days a week now at twitch.tv/cupcakeoce. Come say hi, I would love to see you there.